Hello everyone, thanks for joining in. Today we are going to cover four topics: metrics, metric style, MD5 authentication, and summarization. But before that, let's discuss our topology. So this will be the topology for today. So here each router has one loop back, like R1 has 1.1.1.1, R3 has 3.3.3.3, R4 has 4.4.4.4. Similarly for R5, R6 and R7. So here R1, R3 and R4 in area 49.0001, R5 and R6 will be in area 49.0002, that will be our transit area, and R7 will be in 49.0003. And here we are using subnet 14.1.1.0/24 between R1 and R4, 13.1.1.0/24 between R1 and R3, 34.1.1.0/24 between R3 and R4. Similarly, between R4 and R5, we are using subnet 45.1.1.0/24 between R5 and R6, 56.1.1.0/24, and between R6 and R7, we are using subnet 67.1.1.0/24. We'll have to configure in each router ISIS. So let's do that. So, but before that, let me show you the IP address that we have configured. So as I discussed that 1.0, 14.1.1.1.1, and on interface 3 by 0, IP address is 13.1.1.1, and we have one loopback 1.1.1.1, and we have created extra four loopbacks to cover our summarization topic. So let's configure the ISIS router ISIS, and our net ID is 49.0.0.0.1, and our system ID will be 0000 dot 0000 dot 0001, and last intermediate system will be 00. So we have already explained these things in the previous video. So folks, you have checked, and this router we will made as level 1. Now we will call on the interfaces inside ISIS. So interface G1 by 0, IP router ISIS, and interface G3 by 0, IP router ISIS, interface loopback 0, IP router ISIS, and interface loopback 100, IP router ISIS, 101, 102, 103. Okay, now we will move on R3. We'll do the same thing, but before that we can check here what IP address we have configured. So on interface 3 by 0, we have configured 13.1.1.3, and G4 by 0 34.1.1.3, and we have one loopback. Okay, so let's configure ISIS. Our net ID will be 49.0001, that is our area ID, and system ID will be 0000, and 0003, and the intermediate system 00. Now we will, one more thing here, we can make this router as level 1. Now we will call the interface inside ISIS. So interface G3 by 0, IP router ISIS, and interface G4 by 0, IP router ISIS, and interface loopback 0, IP router ISIS. Okay, now we can see that R3 should establish the neighborship with R1, right, as a L1 neighborship. Now we will move on R4. So this router will be as level 1 2 router. So will not do any changes because by default all the router we have as level 1 2. in ISIS. So router ISIS, but before that we can see here the IP address that we have configured on the interface. So G1 by 0, 14.1.1.4, and on 3 by 0 we have configured 34.1.1.4, and on 4 by 0, 45.1.1.4, and we have one loopback, right? So here net ID is 49.0001, system ID 000000000004, and intermediate system. Now we will call the interface inside ISIS, interface G1 by 0, IP router ISIS, G3 by 0, IP router ISIS, G4 by 0, IP router ISIS. So it should establish the neighborship with the R1 and R3 as a L1, right? Here we can see the IP address that we have configured on the interface. So on 3 by 0, we have configured 56.1.1.5, and on interface 4 by 0, we have configured 45.1.1.5, and we have one loopback 0. So let's configure ISIS. Our net ID will be 49.0002, that is our area, and then system ID will be 000000000005, and intermediate system. We will make this router as a level 2 router, right? So IS type level 2. So this part we have already covered in the previous videos. So folks, please check. If we will cover that topic here as well, so our video will become too long. That's why I'm skipping. So now we will call the interface inside ISIS. So interface G4 by 0, IP router ISIS, and interface G3 by 0, IP router ISIS, interface loopback 0, IP router ISIS. Okay. Now we can see here that it should establish the neighborship with R4. Now we will move on R6. We'll do the same thing. First we will check the IP address that we have configured. So on R6 we have configured 56.1.1.6 on interface 3 by 0, and 67.1.1.6 on interface 4 by 0, and we have one loopback 6.6.6.6. Okay. So router ISIS net ID is 49.0002, and system ID will be 000000000006, and intermediate system 00. Now we will make this router as level 2, as type level 2. Now we will call the interface inside ISIS, interface G3 by 0, IP router ISIS, G4 by 0, IP router ISIS, and interface loopback 0, IP router ISIS. Now we can check the neighborship. So ISIS neighborship, it has established the L2 neighborship with R5. Now we will move on R7. Now we are on R7. We can see here the IP address. So we have configured on 4 by 0, 67.1.1.7, and we have one loop back 1 by 0. Okay, it's not needed. So default interface G1 by 0. Let's check once again. Okay, fine. Now we will configure ISIS. Net ID is 49.0003, that is our area ID, and system ID will be 0000.0000.0007, and intermediate system 00. Now We will make this router as L2 as type level 2. Now we'll call the interface inside ISIS G4 by 0 IP router ISIS and interface loopback 0 IP router ISIS. We can check the neighborship. So it's established with R6. Now we will cover the first topic, that is our metric. So we can see on R4 that all these loopback of R1 is receiving via which router, via R3 or via R1 directly. So let me zoom a little bit. Okay. So IP route ISIS. So all four routes we are receiving directly from R1, right? So folks, as we know that the default metric of each interface in ISIS is 10. Either it's Ethernet interface or loopback interface. So from R4, we can calculate here this interface has 10 metric and loopback has 10. So 10, 10, 20, right? So here we can see that here its metric is 20. So if I will count the metric via R3, so it should have 10, 10 and 10, total 30. So when we will make the metric from 10 to 40, then automatically R3 route will be preferred, right? So let's do that. So we will go in R1 interface G1 by 0, that is our G1 by 0 that is connected to R4 router, and the command is ISIS metric 40. Okay, and we will go on R4 as well, interface G1 by 0, that is interface connected to R1, and the command is ISIS metric 40, right? Now we will check once again. So IP route ISIS. So here it will take some time. So here we can see that it has taken the path via R3, right? Now the metric via R3 is 30 that we have discussed. 10 for this interface, 10 for this interface, and 10 for loopback, right? So our first topic is covered. Now we will cover the next topic, that is our metric style. So let me open the. So guys, so actually metric style in ISIS is two types. First one is narrow, that we have already covered. Actually, the metric we have configured before few seconds, that is narrow and it is by default. Okay, and it is of only 6 bits. But we have one more type here, that is wide metric. That metric we use when we will use the protocol like MPLS, traffic engineering, or route tagging. Okay, and this metric is of 24 bits. One more thing it's important here, that suppose we have two routers. Okay, and if we will not to make the same metric style on the both router, then the neighborship will go down. So it's recommended that we'll have to make the same metric style on each router, right? So that metric so that the neighborship should not be dropped. So let's do that. So let's see the syntax to configure the wide metric. So we'll go in router R1. Command is metric style wide. Let's copy the command and just paste it. Do show history. R1, R3, R4, R5, R6, and last R7, right? So this was our second topic. So let's configure the authentication in ISIS. So actually folks, so MD5 authentication like we do in other protocols, similarly we will use here. So the syntax is, so we will configure here between R1 and R4. So we will see that once we configure the MD5 authentication on R4, never will be breakdown, right? So let's go on R1 once again. First we will configure the keychain. Suppose keychain is Rahul Baranwal and our key is 1 and our key string is YouTube at the rate 123. Inside interface G1 by 0 ISIS authentication mode MD5 ISIS authentication key chain is Rahul Baranwal. So once we have configured the authentication, so here we can see that the CLNS authentication fail. So once we will check the neighborship, so it has broken with R4. Now we will go on R4. First we will configure the keychain, that is Rahul Baranwal. Our key ID is 1 and string is YouTube at the rate 123. Now we will go inside the interface G1 by 0, that is connecting to R1 and ISIS authentication mode is MD5. ISIS authentication key chain is Rahul Baranwal. So we will see here that our neighborship will come up again, right? So this is our authentication part. Now we will cover the last part, that is our summarization. So here we can see that on R4 router, so IP router ISIS, we are receiving all the routes individually, right? Not a summarized route. And also on R7, once we will check, so IP route ISIS, here also we are receiving individually. So what we will do once we will summarize the routes, so all four routes will be converted in a single routes. So once we will summarize this route, so our route will become 192.168.100.20 How it will become? So let's understand. So this is our routes that we have configured on router R1. Okay, so first we will convert these routes into binary. Okay, so here we can see that starting 22 bits are same, right? And last 10 bits are different, right? So here we will do the AND operation. So after doing the AND operation, this binary bit will be generated. So once we will convert this binary number into decimal, so this IP address we will receive, right? So that's why we have said here that once we will summarize these routes, our route will become 192.168.100.0. And why we are using here slash 22? Because starting 22 bits are same, right? So let's summarize these routes. Suppose once we do the summarization on the router where we have created the loopback, then it will not summarize the routes. Let's do. and I'll show you router ISIS, and the command is summary address 192.168.100.0 255.255.252.0. Okay, now let's check on R4 it is summarized or not. See, still we are receiving the individual routes, and on R7 as well we are receiving the individual routes. It's not summarizing the routes. So we'll have to summarize routes on the only edge routers, right? Then it will be summarized. So let's delete this command and apply this command on edge router, that is our R4 router. So we will go inside ISIS, and the command is summary address 192.168.100.0 and the subnet mask is 22.252.0. Now let's check in R7. See, now all the routes are now summarized now. In R5 as well, we will receive as a summarized routes. So guys, this was the agenda for today. I hope you have learned something new. So till the next video, I am signing off. Take care.